our topic for the inaugural forum, Connecticut at the Crossroads. We are indeed at an inflection point in our state's history. It's a critical time period. Decisions taken today will chart the course for years to come. So the guiding purpose and inspiration for the creation of this new Institute for Public Policy is to inform the policy debate here in Connecticut with data, research, and public opinion, to contribute to the policy process through research and data, and to forge constructive and meaningful dialogue between policy leaders, the university community, and the public at large. The Institute also houses within it a polling institute, and we have launched the Polling Institute to gauge public opinion that is focused solely on policy issues and how they affect residents in Connecticut. We found that there was a decided lack of policy research and public opinion polls just focused solely on Connecticut and its difficult challenges. And finally, as another activity of the Institute, we felt that having a forum, a place whereby we could all come together and engage in meaningful dialogue about the challenges facing Connecticut was a critical ingredient for the Institute. All of us, citizens, legislators, members of the university community, and the community at large, all share a common concern for Connecticut and a desire to see the state thrive, have a flourishing economy, and position itself on a solid trajectory for the future. To that end, we have inaugurated this new Policy Institute and this forum tonight, which will be the beginning of a series of forums focused on Connecticut. I'd like to thank the state legislators who are here this evening for taking time out of their busy schedules for what I think will be a fruitful conversation. And the emphasis here is on conversation tonight, not a debate or a speech, but rather a dialogue to share and to take the rare opportunity to engage the issues, to interact with each other without the constraints of a legislative debate or a session, and to interact with each other and members of the audience, to take stock of where we are as a state and where we need to go. From left to right, joining us this evening is State Representative Laura Devlin, State Senator Bob Duff, State Senator Tony Wong, State Representative Brenda Krupchik, State Representative Kristen Vahey, and State Representative Steve Safstrom. Thank you all for coming here this evening and sharing your insights. I'd like to start out with a few overheads that highlight some of the critical issues and that served as the impetus for the first inaugural poll here at Sacred Heart University. So our guiding concerns for the poll has come after a series of national rankings where Connecticut has unfortunately fared unfavorably to other states. And these factors, social, fiscal, governmental, and economic indicators have drawn in recent months national attention, has been the focal point of many news stories and national outlets. And kind of exemplifying this concern was in the recent Atlantic Monthly article, "What on Earth is Wrong with Connecticut?" And Connecticut is a state that's sort of filled with lots of paradoxes and things that are enormously challenging. We have considerable wealth, but a great many fiscal challenges. And so the policy issues facing our state, and here are kind of a representative sample of some of the issues that we are confronting. For example, we know, and these are probably a familiar litany of statistics to many of you who reside here in Connecticut, undoubtedly, but maybe to others not as familiar, but we know that we face one of the highest tax burdens in the nation. We have a very high per capita pension liability. We have high property taxes. We have a very high cost of living. And so all of these factors have kind of reached a critical threshold in Connecticut where we felt it was an opportune time to gauge people's opinions about some of these important issues and to gauge their thoughts on what might be some constructive solutions. We have titled the talk Connecticut at the Crossroads because we are at a critical choice point in our history, and we have to think about the policy questions facing the state And we thought that the way that we could do that at Sacred Heart University at the Institute is to take a deep dive into Connecticut residents' attitudes about the state of the state, and to help hopefully articulate, delineate attitudes, and hopefully delineate some policy options that could factor into policy discussions and debates. And so our first poll dealt with a variety of different topics. First and foremost, because the time period in which we underwent fielding of the questions, which was October, and the weeks leading up to that first poll, Connecticut was in the throes of a very significant state budget crisis. A lot of Connecticut residents are acutely aware of the fact that we had the longest running state budget crisis in our state's history. We went 4 months into the new fiscal year without an adopted budget, and that speaks to the monumental challenges that the state is facing and the difficulty in reaching resolution. I'm glad to say that the state and the legislature resolved the budget a few weeks ago, and that is indeed good news for the state. But we polled people right at the threshold, right before the legislature had adopted the budget. They were in the throes of negotiations, and we thought it was an opportune time to gauge people's attitudes about the budget crisis and about their ideas about its effective resolution. We also asked them a series of questions about the state of the economy generally in Connecticut. We asked them about economic development and jobs. We also asked them questions about the quality of life in Connecticut and the cost of living. So all of those were undertaken in a poll which was conducted in 2 weeks in October, and the results were released around October 26th or thereabouts. And we would like to share with you some of these results, also to use them as a springboard for discussion tonight to gain our legislators' ideas and their thoughts on these results. So I'm just going to move over to the actual poll document. I will add that we have undertaken this polling endeavor with our partner, Great Blue Research, and they are the entity that conducts the poll on our behalf. Sacred Heart University and Great Blue Research are partnering through the Institute for Public Policy to analyze salient issues facing the state of Connecticut, and this is a collaboration combining both entities. The areas of investigation that we undertook in this first poll, and we're going to be polling on a quarterly basis. The idea with the poll is to begin to get a baseline of attitudes and to poll residents over time so that we can begin to plot trends and we can make more long-term, draw some long-term data and conclusions about the direction of opinion in Connecticut. But we wanted to know specifically people's thoughts on the quality of life in Connecticut. We also wanted to gauge the extent to which people are aware that there was a budget crisis. What are people's level of literacy when it comes to questions of the state budget and the state economy? We also wanted to find out from people what their vision was and how they would resolve the state budget crisis. We gained some ideas about how Connecticut can become more business-friendly, according to the residents that we sampled. And we had a number of other questions. It was a rather lengthy poll, and it is chock-filled with interesting findings, and I encourage you to go to the Institute for Public Policy's website. I will note that the Institute is housed in the College of Arts and Sciences here at Sacred Heart University, and I encourage you to pore over those results more in depth than the time would allow. But 1,000 residents were polled, a representative sample between the dates of October 3rd and October 12th. And so I'll just highlight, some of the more salient findings. And let's see if I can just, see if I can make that more. Some of the more salient findings, and there were many, many results that I think bear or are worth discussing. But we found out that many residents, about 1 out of 3, believe that their overall quality of life in Connecticut is declining. We also found that 1 out of 5 residents are finding it very or somewhat difficult to maintain their quality of life. Interestingly, we also found that respondents, nearly half of the respondents making $150,000 a year or more, were actually contemplating leaving the state in the next 5 years. Concern among residents ranged from an awareness or a greatest concern that the tax burden is very, very high and the high overall cost of living. So some of these results, I think bear some meaningful discussion, and we can talk about maybe some of the legislators' thoughts on these findings and how, in particular, you think the state and the budget that was just passed may address and allay, hopefully, some of these concerns. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is going from left to right, just if you could give us your a few minutes, and if you could reflect on some of these findings and how you think the state can address them going forward. If you hold the microphone, that would be the best, and then pass it down to your colleague.
Okay, great. So I have the pleasure of starting?
Yes, you do.
So, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you to Sacred Heart for hosting this event tonight, and particularly on this topic, because I do firmly believe our state is absolutely at a crossroads. I have the pleasure of representing the 134th District, which is part of Fairfield, and it is part of Trumbull. And I'm in my 3rd year in the legislature, serving on the Government Administration and Elections Committee, where I'm in leadership of the committee, also on transportation and on finance. And since my 1st year getting involved in the legislature, where I did not come from a political background, what I would say when I came back from Hartford, that if everybody knew sort of how it worked and what was happening, that there would be a state. And I think we have come a long way over the past, 3 years. I'm not surprised at all by the findings and what was just outlined here. But one of the things about our state, and I'm not originally from here, I'm originally from Chicago, but I've been here for a long time, well over 20. This is the, Fairfield is the hometown, and Connecticut is the home state for my children, who are now 23 and 25. And also wondering if they can stay here, because most of their friends have left. And in fact, 7 of my friends over the past year have also left, past 2 years, and more would go, but they're unable to sell their homes at this point. Our state has always had a reputation, and it has been. It's been a high-cost state, but there were jobs and salaries that sort of counteracted that. Coming from the Midwest, and when I moved to Connecticut the first time, I moved from Louisville, Kentucky, and the salary here was a lot more there, but let me tell you, the cost of the house was a heck of a lot more as well. But it all balanced out. And part of our challenge now is that companies and jobs are leaving. My past 3 years in the Finance Committee, we would hear and debate with other legislators, and we'd say, people are leaving. We've got to stop these tax increases. Oh, no, they're not. No, they're not. That's all anecdotal. No, they're not. But I think now there is clearly a recognition that we do have a problem. I was very heartened this past year, and it was the first time I felt like we were really observing the government that you would want, that anybody would want, when we had a bipartisan budget passed. And the first budget that was vetoed, when colleagues stood up and said on the floor of the House, I know my career's over and I don't care. This is the right thing to do for our state. So there were some really positive moves that were made in that budget. Not all of them carried through, but many did. And things that will control our spending. We've got to put the credit cards down. So I think having a spending cap and having a bonding cap are very positive things. The fact that this is the first budget we've passed without a tax increase in as many years as I can recall is pretty significant. So I think that the findings that you have shown And certainly the economics that we are seeing, I think that is being recognized in the General Assembly and is reflected in the budget that was passed. It's not perfect by any means. It was extremely heartening that it was a bipartisan and well-debated process to put it into place. But I'll stop there and pass the mic to my colleague.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Bob Duff. I represent North Indiana up in the State Senate, and I'm the Senate Majority Leader. And it's a pleasure to be here this evening in front of all of you. As one of the folks, one of the 5 or 6 folks in the room negotiating the bipartisan budget, I was joking, I windowed this room for 5 months. I also am very pleased that we have a bipartisan budget, because we've had for the last 10 years partisan budgets. And I don't know that has always served us well, especially when there have been a lot of tough decisions to be made. One of the reasons why I think people feel the way they do with Connecticut is a number of reasons. One of which is the fact that since 2008, since the economy cratered, it's been tough for Connecticut to kind of find its footing again, because of the fact that we're very reliant on income from Wall Street. That has not come back the way it's been. You see it in with UBS and RBS. They're skeletons of what they once were in Stanford. And the economy has just not grown at the same rate as it had from previous recessions. It used to be for Connecticut, because we're so tied to Wall Street, where we would be moving along, we'd hit recession, there'd be money would be in a deficit, but as soon as the recession was over, we'd kind of come back a lot stronger. That didn't happen this time, and that's not just a Connecticut issue, but because of the fact, again, that we're so tied to Wall Street, that has been an issue. So what we've had to do is we've had to really work hard to continue to compete for jobs and to work to grow companies organically and to bring in businesses from the state of Connecticut. Compounding that was the fact that the legislature and governors of both parties for the last 40 years had not properly paid down our debts. So, for example, we did not pay down pension debt, we did not pay down teacher retirement debt or healthcare debt, and at some point those bills become due. Right now, if you look at current state employees, their pensions are funded 95 to 97% is funded, and I think most people would say that's a good thing. However, if you were hired before 1984, where we still have about 1,300 state employees and all those retirees, we're about $40 billion in debt in that. People hear that, and they think that that just all of a sudden crept up on us yesterday, which it's not. That was decades and decades and decades in the making of not investing in things. Not investing in higher education, not investing in transportation, not investing in other places that would help Connecticut compete to grow those jobs that we desperately need. So it's been for the first time in 7 years, we've actually paid down our debt, or paid it actuarially as we were supposed to. We've invested in transportation in a bigger way. We've invested in higher education in a bigger way. And that's helping to bring companies. For example, Henkel just brought 450 jobs from Arizona to Stanford. They brought people here from other states. Charter Communications, that was one of our first 5 companies, is now building a $500 million complex in Stanford because they know the fact that we have a good workforce here. Sikorsky, a helicopter company, they didn't need to stay here because the helicopters they're making right now is coming to an end. South Carolina, Texas, and Florida competed really hard for Sikorsky to come down to those states. The reason why they didn't, and they have said this publicly, is because we have the top workforce, the best workforce in the entire nation, and on top of that, the best manufacturing supply chain in the nation. So we have a lot of things that are in our favor. What we have to do is make sure, one is that we tell the story, 2 is that we continue to make some of the difficult decisions we need to do, pay down our debt, making sure that we're spending in the proper ways, so that we're spending in ways that contribute to better educational system, better higher education system, better transportation system, that we're continuing to focus on growing jobs in the state, and that's how we will work through some of these difficult decisions. The last point I just want to make on that is that certainly understand everybody's frustration this year with a budget that took a long time. The reason why it took a long time is because the fact that a lot of these decisions that have been made over many decades come to a head at some point. And when you're faced with one bad decision over another, you have to get common ground. You have to find compromise on that. And I would say that I think the residents of the state of Connecticut should be proud of the fact that we did have a bipartisan budget. And it is an example of as what we did when we passed the gun bill after Sandy Hook, is that where we see Washington working in a very partisan manner on practically every issue, and gridlocked and deadlocked, that the part-time state legislature in Connecticut can come together as Democrats and Republicans working together to solve some of the big problems that we have. So I hope that that inspires confidence to a point where people can see the fact that we're working to get through some of these issues that have been building and building and building for such a long time, and that we are making some of the difficult decisions that need to be made.
I'm State Senator Tony Hong, and Sacred Heart is in my district, of which I'm very happy and proud of. I think it's appropriate to have this program with the title of Crossroads. This is a great state. State of Connecticut is a great state. It is a state that all of us have chosen to reside and raise our family and engage in public service. But those numbers you posted are unmistakable. You know, it's sort of like the Giants this year, right? They're bad. And there's no denying it. And I think one of the biggest problems we have in state government is we put our head in the sand. We keep on saying, it'll come around. It'll come around. It'll get better. That we're preaching for failure. No, the numbers show for itself. We are not doing the job that we need to do to represent the best interests of the people in our state. And I think the first problem is we do have a problem. It's loud and clear. I think we spend too much. We tax too much. We are not transparent with how we govern. You know, one of the big questions is our pension liability, which is about to fall off a cliff in regards to liability. But hold on. We've been calculating our pensions return on an average of 7% return every single year. For all the people in finance, the fact is, the average is probably, for the number of years, probably 2.5%, 3%. And by compounding liability, we build that liability. Yes, have we shortfalls? Absolutely. Government has shortfalls, but we have not been honest in how we govern. So there is a lack of transparency in how we govern. I think the second critical component is the fact that we have not been predictable at all. We go swing one way, it's almost like a roller coaster ride. Households don't operate that way. Businesses don't operate that way. You know, when we spoke to GE executives before they made the move, one of the biggest frustrations is the fact that our first budget under Governor Malloy didn't occur till late in the summer. And we had, at that moment, the highest tax increase in the history of our great state. But to make matters worse, we went retroactive to January. In fact, I believe GE executives, Brenda was present, Representative Devlin was president, they said literally they were embarrassed the fact that they had to withhold paychecks on Thanksgiving because of the retroactiveness of how we govern. So there is no predictability, and we go on a roller coaster ride back and forth. Businesses don't operate that way, households don't operate that way, and people have shown that they're walking with their feet, that they're moving out of our state. The numbers are undeniable. I don't care how you spin it. Number three, we have not built a system that's organically sustainable. What was mentioned earlier is the first 5. I believe now it's probably the first 20. And the fact is, we have empty buildings in Stanford of RBS and UBS that are not organically sustainable. We can no longer try to buy companies to come and settle here. When the market forces are competing against us, we're no longer just competing with the next town or the next state. We're competing with a worldwide marketplace. And I think we have to understand that. And we have to compete harder. But the problem is, Massachusetts has done it. Rhode Island, of all states, has done it. And they've done it because government has demonstrated a discipline and an honesty to say, we need to stop spending, we need to stop taxing, we need to say, better days are around the corner. That's just wishful thinking. We have to make cuts. This budget that we did, I'm proud of the imperfect aspect, but we protected our municipalities, we protected education in our communities, we protected in some bit our nonprofits. We did not allow the governor's draconian executive order to go into effect. But there are imperfections, and there were cuts in those programs. And you will start seeing those cuts go into effect. One of the biggest issues that we're encountering is the fact that the Medicare savings eligibility, we reduced it from over 200+% in elevated eligibility. We subsidized it. We've now reduced it to 100% of the federal threshold. That's almost 13,000 and below that gets it. We're gonna hurt and impact a lot of our seniors. Those are consequences of cutting government, not simply paper chases. What we're gonna have to do in the next 2 to 4 years are more of these cuts, more of these difficult decisions. And I hope we all have the courage and the responsibility to make those cuts. And I will tell you, one of the most frustrating things that people need to go back to, right now as a legislative body, we are operating with one hand tied behind our back. We passed a 10-year labor agreement that locks this state's finances with our important and valued labor resources. But for 10 years, who would vote for such a deal? For 10 years, we would lock in labor discussions. We are forcing those kind of costs onto taxpayers. For the first 4 years of that labor agreement, we have a no layoff provision. I asked anyone in the marketplace, where do you have a job that guarantees you 4 years of no layoff? You just don't have it. And the ultimate thing is, what we're looking to try to do is fairness. What we ask of taxpayers, again, what we ask of households, what we ask of our businesses, we should also ask of government and our political leaders. So, look, I'm thrilled and I'm honored to represent the 28th District. But make no mistake about it, anybody who's going to run for office in 2018 need to recognize they need to be honest with the people that they're representing. And they have to stand by the votes that they've cast when they've been in service. Don't give the answer that's complicated. At the end of the day, people that are moving out of the state, people that have to pay health insurance at the expense of food on the table, it's not complicated for them. They can't afford to live in our state.
Good evening. My name is Brenda Kupchik, and I want to just thank Sacred Heart for having us here tonight and for even doing the poll, because I think it's helpful. I mean, there are a lot of polls that have been done, and I know a lot of this bad news, right? You see these polls, and this isn't the only one. There's been a lot of them over the years. This is the most recent. How Connecticut's got a lot of financial trouble. And, you know, we could spend all night talking about why. There's a lot of blame to go around for a whole lot of different people. Except for me. But honestly, you know, this is a beautiful state. I grew up in Fairfield. I grew up here. I love this state. And yes, do I see the trouble? I'm a small business owner with my husband and I own, running and operating a small heating and air conditioning company. It's hard. It's hard to run a small business, period. It's really hard in Connecticut. It's complicated. There's a lot of regulations. There are a lot of taxes. Taxes for stuff that you don't even know you're paying or why you're paying. And then you see your government, right? So you run for office and you go up there and you see what's really going on. And the first, let's face it, the first time you're up there, you can't believe what's happening, like Representative Devlin said. You can't believe how government runs and how sort of cavalier sometimes people are with other people's money. Or maybe a lot of people just didn't, you know, don't run businesses and don't understand the complexities of how hard it is to be running a business. But the bottom line is that there's a whole lot of reasons why Connecticut's in trouble. right? People used to want to live in the suburbs and they worked in New York, and maybe now most people want to live in the cities and they like that kind of environment. And millennials like living in cities and city-like environments. So there's that part of it too. But there's also the fiscal piece, how we managed our government. I'm not an economist, but I know when things are wrong, and what I think we've been doing, as Senator Warren mentioned, has been wrong. Calculating pension revenues coming in at 7-8%, when no one in the free world was doing that. And we were actually spending money, pretending like we were getting that kind of revenue. We weren't. And people were saying that our treasurer should be doing that our government should be doing that. And it just kept happening. So there's a whole lot of blame to go around. There's people who are ringing the bells. Look at Massachusetts, right? You have a Republican governor, you have a Democratic-controlled legislature. They're working together. They're working together, and that state that used to be called Taxachusetts is now called Massachusetts. And GE moved there, and so are other companies too. So Rhode Island used to be considered a very high-tax state too. People would say, oh, it's beautiful, but it's too high taxes. They have a Democrat governor who was an economist. And she went in and pulled apart those pension agreements and said, we cannot afford these in the long term. We need to restructure them or the whole state's going to collapse. And she did it. Now, it wasn't a target against labor. It was, we can't afford to do this. It will end up not being able to pay anybody's pension down the line. So you have to fix it. We had an opportunity to do that this year when the governor went in and negotiated with the labor unions. Now, I'm all for fair labor agreements, and as everyone in this room is. But when every study that you read or every report that you read says that Connecticut state employees have better salaries, better health care, better pension than any other state in the entire country, it makes you say to yourself, well, who are we? I mean, why aren't we more in line with everyone else? I mean, state employees have better pension and benefit deals than any unions in the entire towns that make up state of Connecticut. So when the governor went in and negotiated these, you were thinking, okay, he's going to work on this to try to get us back on, track, because this is very expensive. And to be honest, it's not enough. So it comes down to the legislature, for the first time ever since I've been there, that we actually voted on a labor agreement. And, I said to my colleagues, we have to vote against this and send it back to the governor to renegotiate it. It's not good enough. We're facing a $5 billion deficit, and this plan was giving us, I think, $1.5 billion in savings. It's not enough. And the layoff clauses, for years we've been talking about, restructuring agencies in government, and the only way to do that is to put some agencies together or maybe lay off some people. With this deal, we can't do any of that. So when that deal passed, and by the way, on party line, I was like shocked. Not that I didn't think state employees deserve a fair deal, but it's just unaffordable. It's just unaffordable, and it goes on for 10 years. So I have a lot of optimism. I'm not going anywhere because I love this state, because I'm a small business owner. I'm not really sure what we would do. But it's going to be a real struggle for everybody in the state, and it's going to take bipartisanship. That was the one thing, even though it took forever for us to have a budget, it was the one thing, even though I didn't like a whole lot of stuff in that budget, that I wanted to vote for a bipartisan budget, because I want to help send a message to the people of the state and to the constituents that I represent, that I'm willing to work with other people, that we'll reach across the aisle and work together, and to try to do our best to stay the state that we all really love. So try to be optimistic. I'm hoping that it doesn't become a partisan, brawl up there this next session, because we really have some serious, serious problems. And as Senator Wong said, the budget's going to blow up. I mean, there are parts of it. It's just not sustainable. We're losing revenue. People are with wealth are leaving the state, and so that means our revenues are coming in a lot lower than we expected. There's going to be some together, and we're gonna have a lot of work to do, but I think if we do work together, that it can be done.
Hi, everyone. How are you all this evening? Good. Good. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and thank you so much to Sacred Heart for having us. What an incredible resource in our community. I represent the 133rd District, which is right down the street, and have benefited tremendously from partnership with the university, having had wonderful visitors who have come, students who have worked, and hopefully interns in the future. My family and I chose to come here to Connecticut. In 2002, we moved here after my husband was serving in the military on the West Coast. And when we bought our house, some of you may have heard me say this before, we moved into a beautiful tree-lined street. There were so many wonderful old maple trees. And in the time that we have been here, we've lost a lot of those trees. They've been cut down because their natural life has been lived, and it's time for new trees. So some of us in the neighborhood have planted new trees and have nourished them, and from stick bare root trees to now growing trees. But as we've lost those trees, we've been exposed. I look at us in Connecticut when I think about this polling data. I think about the fact that we are exposed right now, but we're also planting new trees. And the trees that we need to plant are creating jobs, partnering with our businesses, which is not just about passing legislation, which is certainly part of it. It's also about creating relationships and leveraging resources. Here in Connecticut, we have some of the most amazing resources in the nation, which is the people of our state, which are the resources like Sacred Heart and the other institutions of higher education we have in our state. And we need to make sure that we are doing the things like I know is happening here at Sacred Heart, where these institutions are talking to our employers and connecting with businesses to understand the jobs that are available and the training that we need to provide for our students. We hear, all of us hear from manufacturers in our state, that there are jobs available. We have a gap in terms of those who are trained and ready to go work in those fields. Manufacturing is something that this state was known for a long time ago, and then as we heard about in terms of Senator Duff talking about the shift in jobs in the financial services industry, manufacturing has certainly left Bridgeport, but what's coming back now is advanced manufacturing. And so those are the trees I think we need to plant. When I look at this polling data and when I think about it and react to it, I also think about the issue of income inequality and migration and what that means. We have to be aware of the issue of people leaving our state. It impacts us on many levels. So I'm a social worker. I like to reframe things. We do that. Some of you may know social workers in your lives. So thinking about that in a different way, let's think about why people come here. Why are people choosing Connecticut? And let's build on those strengths that we have and make sure that we are continuing to retain and attract new students. Earlier today, I was sitting with a group of students from the Hartford area and talking with them, and they're seniors, and I said, well, we want you to stay here in Connecticut. In order to stay, you need a job. You need to be able to have an affordable place to live as well. So when we look at those issues around cost of living, we need to look at how we're choosing to develop. Are we developing in smart ways around transit centers? I know lots of young people who don't want to have cars, so we need to think about our infrastructure in that way. And when I think about this data, I think about, rather than focusing on our frustrations, and there certainly are, you'll hear that from all of us, that there are plenty of frustrations. There are real issues that are facing our state. We need to continue to focus on the future and on solutions. How we choose to have this conversation with one another, how we choose to dialogue often impacts where we are able to go. And so this year's budget is a perfect example of that. How the leadership chose to sit in the room, that windowless room, to have the conversation and the dialogue is what allowed them to get to a place that got us to a budget. No, I will be so interested, and I'm so glad to hear that this polling will happen over time, so we can see trends. Because when you started the presentation, you talked about using data and research and public opinion. And this poll was done at a time when I think every one of us sitting at this table was at the height of our frustration ourselves, and we heard it clearly from the residents. We were looking for a budget. And so it will be very interesting to me to see the trend line and what we can do in terms of planting those seeds. We have to have a long-term view. There are real issues that are facing our state that are here for a variety of reasons, many of which have compounded over time. Part of the conversation I had with the young people I was sitting with today was about saving as individuals. And talking to them, we got in a conversation about personal finance. And I said, I hope that you'll start saving for yourself, for retirement. They looked at me as if I was a little bit strange. Why do we have to save for retirement? We're in our 20s. That's kind of silly, isn't it? Of course not. And the issue of compounding, right? If you save $10 now, what will that be worth in 50 or 60 years? So we certainly have found that issue in terms of our liabilities for our pensions. We did not pay what was due. In fact, in this budget, a disproportional amount of the money that we're spending on funding pensions has gone to the unfunded liability of bills that were not paid in the past. We are going to have to continue to work together to focus on the solutions, to look at some very difficult decisions that are going to have to be made in terms of prioritizing services going forward, to continue to be as accurate as we can in terms of predicting revenue, and to continue to have conversations that are productive, that will help us move forward.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Stasham. I'm the state representative for the west side of Bridgeport, so the Black Rock, Brooklawn, West End areas of the city. I guess I'm bad at cleanup here, so I'll try not to be redundant because I think a lot of the issues have been hit here. But to me, there's three main issues in Connecticut that are decades in making and are going to take some time to work through. Anybody who says they've got an overnight fix, I think is full because there isn't. The first, as you heard, is our debt and our debt service. I think that's borne out. The polling data has been borne out in news circles over time. One of the stats that always sticks with me is we started handing out pensions in the state in the 1920s. We started putting money away to pay for those pensions in the 1980s. I wasn't born until 1982. And we started fully funding our current year pension obligations in 2011. That is a lot of years of simply kicking the can down the road. That's Democrats, it's Republicans, it's governors, it's legislators, it's you name it. Everybody shares some of the blame for that. It is what it is, and we need to work through it. So one of the things I am actually most excited about from this budget, a provision that hasn't come up yet, is there's actually a clause in this budget that says if and when there's a year again, and the year will come, where the state's surplus exceeds a certain threshold, that money automatically has to get swept in to pay down long-term debt. There was a year not so long ago under a couple of our previous governors where they had over $1 billion surplus. Some of you might remember this, but they decided, the legislature decided to do at the time, send everybody back a check, a refund check, if it was an election year. I think it was $30 or $40 or something like that. Does anybody remember what they did with their $30 or $40 check? Probably not. Would you have preferred that $1 billion be put into paying down some of our long-term debt, compounding over time, so that the magnitude of the problem wouldn't be as big as it is now? So that provision was built into this. To me, I think that is one of the key provisions as we dig out of this hole that's been created over decades and decades. The second major problem, again, that's been touched on, and is no secret to anybody here in Fairfield County, is our transportation system. We can talk to a blue in the face about tax policy in the state of Connecticut. That's only part of the problem. The other part of the problem being attracting and retaining companies is our transportation system. It takes forever to get anywhere you want to go. We've concentrated jobs, corporate jobs, basically in 2 cities in the state, Hartford and Stanford, and we fight to get in or out of those 2 cities. So we've got a train system that is comparable to a lot of third world countries, and we have no access within an hour from this area to international airport. None. It takes you well over an hour and a half to JFK and Fort Bradley from here. And to me, this area in particular, the greater Bridgeport area, suffers more so than any part of the state because of that. Because we don't have reliable, ready, quick access to a major airport. It just takes far too long for folks who travel day in and day out for business to get to JFK or LaGuardia. And then I think the third thing, and this was touched on, is we've ignored our cities as economic drivers. You know, we led the charge in the 1960s out of New York City. We led the charge to the suburban office park, a place like GE, a place like we see up and down Merritt Parkway in a lot of communities, which was fine. And as Senator Duff mentioned, part of that was sort of the finance industry at the time. We were beneficiaries of that. As the finance industry has retrenched back into major cities, as young professionals and seniors have looked to move back to dynamic urban cores, as companies have sought to chase that tech talent back into cities, Connecticut has been left flat-footed. Certainly compared to New York and Boston, but also other cities. When you look at, I was born and raised here in Connecticut, but when my dad was the last plant manager at the old Army Engine base in Stratford. Plant closed down, we eventually moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina for a period of time. Charlotte, North Carolina is a city that's just grown sort of out of the blue. They've invested in that downtown core. You know, even what's happening in Providence, that's been mentioned. You know, how they've reinvested in their downtown, and companies and professionals and college students are flocking back into downtown Providence, which not so long ago was a city not so different than the image people have of Waterbury, Bridgeport, or New London, or so many of our cities across the state that we just have not done a good enough job of addressing the issues in. So to me, and I think part of that city issue, the biggest part of that, and going back to the polling data, is two things. One, I think Connecticut has a reputation for a lot of folks, looking at the politics of Connecticut's boring, right? It has a reputation of being a boring state. It's this old Yankee mentality, and it's just not, it's not innovative, it's not creative. We see it up here in terms of revenue. You know, so I think that's a piece of it, but it's also the cost of living in those cities, right? We saw the data out there, and we can quibble with it, but you know, whether it was second, third, fourth, 10th in taxes, most tax states. We're not in the upper echelon. And I think one of the most authoritative sources on that is the Tax Foundation report. This is coming from Democrat from Bridgeport, I get that, but the Tax Foundation is not exactly a liberal publication. But the Tax Foundation report I find interesting. The Tax Foundation does say Connecticut is 44th in the country in overall business taxes. But what a lot of people don't do is flip to page 2 of that report. And what page 2 says is if you look at income taxes, we're number 30. If you look at corporate taxes, we're number 33. If you look at unemployment compensation taxes, we're like number 20. So you sit there and say, okay, those are all middle of the pack. How do we get from the middle of the pack down to 44? Well, we're 49th in the country in property taxes. It's the property taxes. The property taxes in Connecticut are by far the most onerous and regressive tax we pay as a state. And it's because we subsidize so much inefficiency at the local level. We talked about the budget and budget savings, and we quabble about how much money we save or don't save on employee union contracts. The bottom line is in this biennial budget, state employees save us $1.5 billion. Billion with a B. We're still putting out $5.2 billion of a $19.8 billion budget back to our cities and towns in some form of state aid. It's 30% of our total budget. And the cuts to our municipalities this year were minimal. And And I'm not advocating for large-scale customer municipalities, but we can't ignore that purple elephant in the room. And it's that we subsidize inefficiencies. When we compete with a city like Charlotte, or even Providence, Charlotte is the size of Hartford County. One fire chief, one police chief, one superintendent of schools, one purchasing department, one emergency dispatch facility, you name it, go through the list. We subsidize that inefficiency at the local level through your state tax dollars and through your local property taxes. And unless until we're willing to address that purple elephant in the room that we just simply can't compete on a national level without addressing the fact that your 16 square miles cannot be totally distinct from my 16 square miles of land. We can't compete against each other with the same development, and we have to start finding inefficiencies. We're going to continue to be significantly more expensive than some of those other places we're trying to compete with because it's by design, it's by necessity. We have for decades continued to be okay with subsidizing that inefficiency at the local level.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize State Senator Tony Boucher, who's joined us, and allow her the opportunity to reflect, as the other panelists have, on the recently passed state budget and how and what way, if it has addressed some of the concerns that we've cited in our poll.
Well, first of all, thank you so very much for the invitation to join you today, Professor Denarz. You come from a long family line of great educators and advocates for higher education. So it is truly a pleasure to be here with my colleagues as well, that we enjoy very much working together. And in politics, you know, it really is more about relationship building than almost anything else in order to get anything done. Especially when we're in this difficult position as we are. As was just stated, I'm State Senator Tony Boucher. I represent 7 towns in Lower Fairfield County, spanning from Norwalk all the way up to Danbury and everything in between. However, and just so that you know, principally I'm a businesswoman. Connecticut's a part-time legislature. Some people don't know that. We're not full-time like Congress. Many of us, most of us on this panel, have other careers, other jobs in the private sector. I worked as a top executive for Weston. I worked for GE when Jack Welch was president of that division. I had small companies, NV Systems, that was a computer mainframe maintenance company. I have been involved in helping develop small biotech investor relation firms. And currently, and almost for the last 20 years, work for an investment firm in Lower Fairfield County, an institutional investment firm. All the while, raising my children here in my home state, I have served in local and state government on boards of education, board of selectmen, state board of education, in the House for 12 years, and now in the Senate. And I have to tell you that it wasn't always so. I actually grew up in the industrial blue-collar Naugatuck Waterbury Valley. My family and I came there when I was 5 and my brother 7 from a small little village in Italy. My father had a 5th grade education and my mother did not have a day in school, and that's why education was so prized in our family. It was a tough time. But because of education and my father's desire to make sure his children succeeded, it became the focal point of our family. And happily, my brother built a telescope when he was 12, became a top young scientist in America as a senior in high school, number 9, I think, became an astrophysicist, an artist, and a violinist, all because of this wonderful state and its public educational system. So we sort of owe it everything. And probably what drives my crazy life of juggling all these multiple roles. There is no question that the Connecticut I grew up in, the aspirational Connecticut, has changed markedly. Connecticut was the envy of the country. You were proud to say you were from Connecticut. We were the #1 school system in the country, #1, 4th, 6th, and 8th grade by all measures, for a good part of the time that I was on local board and state board of ed. But just as its education system has been challenged, our state now is in very deep, serious trouble. And we've been warning about it for years, I have to say. Been in the minority up in Hartford for years. In fact, only this January, after all these years, are we actually tying this in. For was quite a remarkable change. So there has been one party that has controlled the process, the votes, and the budgets. But hey, that one party was the party of Connecticut without a state income tax. So what's changed over that time? For me, it's been an attitude of keeping your head in the sand and taking a wait-and-see approach that has led us to one budget deficit after another. And essentially, it's put Connecticut in a Category 5 financial hurricane, and your polls tell it so. And now we're in the battle for Connecticut's very financial life. Those credit downgrades keep coming. The rating agency tells us exactly what's wrong. We don't have to say it. Job losses month after month, and extraordinarily so this last month, 6,600 jobs in 1 month, 2,000 in the month before. That's 8,600 jobs in 2 months. And we've been losing about 11,000 a year. You know, economists say that if you have 3 quarters of a negative GDP growth, you're going into recession. And the last one, we had a 0.6 minus GDP growth. Just as we watch all of our neighboring states, not Florida, not Texas, but New York and Massachusetts, and even Rhode Island do well and start to regain. In fact, Massachusetts regained 300% of its job losses. And when we talk about, you know, the 3 priorities that were just mentioned by my colleagues of debt and transportation and our cities, this is affecting all of that. We can't do the good things we want to do if we're in financial crisis. There is no question about it. And I have to tell you that our good, well-known economist that's in my district, Larry Kudlow, you all know who he is, he tells me all the time, you know, it takes 3 years to put yourself in serious financial trouble as a state, as a country even, and 3 years to get out of it. So let's stop revisiting the past. You know, it doesn't help us today. There's been one party in control, the executive branch and legislative branch, for 2 full terms. It's more than 3 years. We have had multiple opportunities to get out of this hole that we have dug. But there is some hope, because we saw it just recently. We just saw it recently, because in our 18 to 18 tie in the Senate, which, by the way, that tie has been broken multiple times by the Lieutenant Governor, who cast the 19 vote for the governor, we actually passed a budget, wanted, by the way, the 10 that the Republican side tried to bring forward without tax increases, because in fact, tax policy does drive the economy. Tax policy does drive people out of state. It is doing that. 76% of the people polled way before your poll, yours is much more current, but there was one in 2006, said that they left Connecticut, 76% that were polled by our Department of Revenue Services said it was a combination of income tax and inheritance tax. So, we no longer cannot afford, we can no longer tax more in any of our budgets. We need to spend less. We can't spend more, even on the things we want. This is really difficult. And I will tell you just something that happened to me over the Thanksgiving Day holidays. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday with your family. Me and my family really needed a day away. We just needed a day away. And I thought, you know, historically, Boston would be a great place to go. So I picked up the phone and called a hotel operator. And the hotel operator to confirm that we could spend the night there and take our grandchildren on the Freedom Trail, have a little turkey in this historical spot. And the hotel operator says, oh, I see your address is Connecticut. I said, yeah, it is. He says, oh, I'm from Waterbury. It was obvious that he was a minority, very young man. You know, hotel operators don't make a lot of money. And he says, oh my God, you know, I had to move because I couldn't afford it here anymore. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I needed to buy a car to get to work. And I, you know, looked at the car I really wanted, and the one I wanted would have cost me $1,300 a year in property taxes in Connecticut. And in Massachusetts, you know, it's only $400. That made the difference for this young man. He says, well, my mom is still in Waterbury. I'm worried about her. You know, she's a minister in a Baptist church there. You ought to go visit her. And I think I'm going to after this conversation, because he gave me a lot to talk about. It's not just him. You know, you've heard it from your neighbors. I've had more goodbye letters that people, constituents, and friends that have given up. You have heard it everywhere. You have heard it. But I also got a hopeful letter just recently. It meant the world to me. It nearly brought me to tears. It was 11:30 at night. I finally got to open up my mail, and I looked at this beautiful card handwritten, and it was from a lifelong Democrat, a very partisan lifelong Democrat. She said, you know, you've served our community for a long time. I have to tell you, it's time for me to just give up the partisanship. We have to stop this, Tony. Please do something. I support your efforts. It's time to stop being partisan. We're in big trouble, and I support whatever you're doing out there. You know, please get people to work together, and I think we've almost gotten there with this last bipartisan budget that nobody really liked, but they also knew they couldn't allow the governor to attack our towns and cities with the same kind of mismanagement that has been symbolic of this current time that we've been experiencing up in Hartford, and punish the very communities that have done all the things that we've asked this administration to do. And I'll end with this one note. Being a vice chair now of the Finance Committee, I've asked twice, 2 years in a row, for the governor's budget chief if they, in their negotiations, would please reform the pension system and bring it to where the communities are making it a defined contribution plan, 401, or at least phase it in. And each time he said, we don't like defined contribution plans, we like our defined benefit plan. And I said, well, here, that's what's trouble, what's the problem for Connecticut? Because now you're asking those very towns that have moved in that direction to take on the costs and the responsibilities of this state government. So we have to change that. And the good news is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle also see that and are now working together, we hope, for this next session so we can solve the current deficit position that we're in. Thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions that you have for any of our panelists, or to simply make a comment or a remark. There is a microphone in the center aisle. If you would just approach the microphone. Thank you.
So we talked about revenue, transparency, with the budget going up. Currently, as we look at the federal proposal for tax change, we'll probably blow up faster than later. Because Medicare was first, and a lot of the things down on the federal government. So I have a few suggestions on that. I'd like to know what you might be doing about it. When I was in business, we put a plan out. Those are all dreams usually. So what we had success doing was putting together a gap management plan. So whenever we got to a point where what we dreamed was going to come our way wasn't coming our way, we started working on that difference. I don't know in the state, I know you're all temporary, you're not full-time, but is there anything in the state government that is starting to, right now, is anticipating that and is working daily on the items that can be effective, more quickly than the ones that can be effective?
Are you speaking of what's happening in the federal government and how
No,
we're
I'm
responding
fine.
to
The
that?
federal government's going to make it worse. I'm talking about our state government. Right now, we have a budget. We know that budget is sort of on life support in a way. And we know it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse than better. So is there a group up there of any type that's focused wholly on saying when it starts to get worse, like next month, what are we going to do to fill that gap or to reduce it?
I think, are you referring to the Office of Fiscal Analysis report that came out that shows that this current budget is now reported to be about $200 million in deficit? Is that what you're?
First you have to work on the 200, but on an ongoing basis, the 200 will become 300. Unless there's anticipation in front of that. And part of the anticipation is being very public, saying, hey folks, this is costing you, when we open the door each year, we've got $30 million going out before we can start the work. But what we're talking about now is get a budget. You say, what are we doing to focus on what we said is going to happen if it's not happening, for the worst?
Sort of a mid-year correction to the budget, would that be? Okay. I think Senator Wong, I think you were about to remark.
I think you're right in the Office of Fiscal Analysis provides the nonpartisan numbers. But you're right, I remember taking a stat class in school where the professor said there are lies, there are daggone lies, and then there's stats. The reality was we are in a deficit right now because of revenue projections that were offered by the Office of Policy Management when we began the budget process. So we are short on revenue from income and sales taxes. And as I said, I think that's a powerful point of compounding. Our problems are compounded. And I think we really do need to be more transparent, more honest, and recognize that we cannot tax ourselves out of the problem. We've had 2 record tax increases in the history of the state, and we're still in deficit mode. So I think I'm excited about working together as a legislative body, but we have to move forward and recognize, and I'm just trying to brace people for this, is the fact that the difficulties and the decisions that now need to be made are going to have significant impact in our communities. And people need to be accountable and stand up and say, what are our priorities? Is our priorities to take care of those that are most at risk and vulnerable in our community, to make sure public safety is there, to make sure our infrastructure is there? We need to make prioritization. That's what's so frustrating about the labor agreement that was passed through. Granted, they did contribute nearly $1.5 billion into our deficit solution. But the reality is, you got a 4-year layoff provision. You have, here's what's wrong. Our health care insurance program, if you participate in a wellness program, your deductible is 0. That just made your eyes blink, didn't it? Share that with the general public. That's not fair. The taxpayers are funding it. That's what I'm saying is, we're not looking to hurt anyone. We respect our state employees, our union employees, our teachers, our first responders. But even they don't have what the state employees have. Accountability, fairness, and let's be honest with what we have to provide as solutions.
Who's working on to get ready?
Well, you know what, I'm really glad that you brought this up. It's obvious that you're a very astute observer of what's going on in the state government. I have to tell you, the problem with the process is that there was a vote on a contract. And by the way, it was a historic time because you have the ability, finally, after 20 years of actually affecting the costs of state employees, which is the biggest driver, right now, of what is costing us. The reason that we're the last in the nation tax-free day, which means the Tax Foundation, by the way, I'm glad they brought that up too, they actually calculate every state has a tax-free day. The tax-free day is when you finally stop paying for your federal, state, and local taxes out of your paycheck and actually bring a full paycheck home to pay for your own expenses. And when I started in the Senate, it was in March. Do you know, we are now the last day in the entire country, May 21st. It's by far the last day when we finally can start bringing a paycheck home. Oh my God, that's almost half a year. Can you imagine working almost half a year just to pay your taxes? No wonder people are fleeing. This is a very bad dynamic. So if people say, well, we're not really taxing that much, whereas the same as anyone else, just look at that tax-free day. That'll tell you, no, we're not like anyone else. But what happened this year was a historic time to finally renegotiate all these high structural costs. And what did they do? They passed a contract before they passed the budget. So in other words, they spent all the money first, and then they went to try to find out how to pay for it, instead of saying, how much money do we have, and then let's negotiate what we can afford to pay. It was reversed, and you're right. And one of the things that people don't realize, a couple of years ago, it was a very partisan vote. It was a vote, straight party line, that forced the state to not report their numbers until after the election was over. In other words, we were to get these numbers to see where we are in September or before the election. But The majority passed a bill that says, no, we're not gonna report it until after the election is over. We could have used those numbers, right before we negotiated the budget. And instead, we got those numbers after the budget was done, and lo and behold, we're nearly $180 million still in deficit, and 150 in deficit in the following year, this 2-year budget. So we're already in the hole, we're starting out in the hole. And you're saying, so what are you gonna do about it? Well, the Republicans have come forward this week and last week and said, let's meet right now, let's go back in, let's fix this thing. And the budget that we got passed with Democratic votes in the House and Senate, that the governor vetoed, actually had some of those structural changes in there. The bipartisan budget we just passed, okay, had said in there that the governor should be going to personnel costs to close some of that gap, and he didn't. He didn't. He kept them whole, and instead he came to the cities and towns to cut them once again and target all of our towns for property tax increases in the process of that. And so that is why there's calls right now to meet right now. We're hoping the leadership, and we have some of them here on this dais, that they won't take, let's wait and see. We can't afford to wait and see until February. We have to do it right now.
Other questions for the panelists?
I'm a Connecticut resident. I lived here all my life. This past year and 3 months, I have been out of work. There is no jobs. You mentioned Henkel's. Henkel's is not a new company. Henkel's was originally somewhere else. They came in and they merged with Sun Products. So when companies merge, and I've seen it firsthand, they start laying off people because they don't need duplication. Okay? So you might say they brought 400 people into the state. Okay, what does that mean? 400 new homes got bought? What does that mean to the people that still reside here, like myself, who doesn't even have a job? There is no jobs. I've applied to so many companies who have no idea. It is so upsetting to see these companies lower someone's salary to the point that you can't live in your own state that you reside in. It is a sad fact that nothing has changed. Now, you also have Stanford growing, booming. You see these big, beautiful corporate buildings coming up for people to move in, like millennials wanting that little inner city life. They don't want the suburban home anymore. Okay, who can afford them? They're $2,000 to $4,000 a piece. Companies are not paying that. 2, now you have residents from New York coming into Connecticut for stealing Connecticut jobs. We're paying more money to go into New York City to get the job, and they're not even paying you $80,000 a year. Commuting 2 hours a day, paying $500 a month in commuting costs, and making $80,000? Come on, that's a joke. It's a joke. It really is a joke. And then I don't know what New York people pay to come into Connecticut, but they're stealing Connecticut jobs. Maybe tax them this way. I don't know what to say, but there's so many other resolutions. I'll give you another one. You say that our towns can't meet the budget. I'll give you an example. Okay, we're funded by the state somehow for all these little towns. Oh, I live in the town of Monroe, and I was told that we're somehow funded somehow. And I'm thinking to myself, why is our town funded? For what reason? I know for a fact the median price of a tax in Monroe is about $8,000 or $9,000 per house. Median. I'm talking your bare cheap minimum tax in Monroe for a home is $6,000. Your average home goes up to $14,000 a year on taxes. So I'm going on the median price. Let's say 8,000. There's 8,000 homes in Monroe. 8,000 times 8 is $63 million. You're telling me you can't budget a town on $63 million? You know why? Because when I go to town hall and I ask them to give me your financial statements, you know what they give me? A book that makes no sense. Not even the most genius finance manager can't even understand where all the numbers are. You know why? Because I'm a head of household. When my father died at 20 years old, I took care of his house, my mother's house, and I have my own 4,000 square foot house, but making zero right now. Let me tell you, if they can't budget your own town with the money that you make in your own town without relying on state money, there's something wrong, and I'll tell you why. You break it down very simple. Every school should have its own cost analysis with how many teachers are in it, with a complete breakdown of the cost of that one unit. That's the way it should be for every town. And then you really find out where the money goes.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two more questions or comments from the audience. Oh, yes, please. Would any of you like to remark on her comments?
Sorry, I have one more thing to make a comment on. We have these nonprofits, I don't know how they all work, but I'll mention one that really bothers me, Goodwill. They moved to our town, Monroe, Connecticut, and they don't pay $1 to support our town. Who knows what they do with their money? I don't think that's right. We should put a stop to that.
She's not wrong. You know, I come from Bridgeport where the mill rate is 54 mils. I have very little sympathy, unfortunately, for a lot of, I shouldn't say, I have very little, patience, I guess, sort of for this conversation that property taxes in the state are too high without folks really having an honest conversation about what to do about it. We all agree that property taxes in Connecticut are too high, right? We've seen it in report after report after report after report. It's particularly egregious in our cities, you know, our inner suburbs, our rural areas. It's across the board, I think, for folks. And it goes back to this level of redundancy. You know, we have these little towns. There was a bill a couple years ago to regionalize emergency dispatch facilities, okay? Which by and large are call centers, right? Somebody calls, hi, 911, I have an emergency. Can you send an ambulance? I'm having a heart attack. Can you send a fire truck? My house is burning down. I don't know about you, but if my house is burning down, I don't care whether the person who answers that phone is sitting here in Fairfield or Bridgeport or Hartford. As long as somebody dispatches a fire truck. And right now, the way it is actually everybody usually calls with their cell phones. So if you call with your cell phone right now, sitting here and say, hi, I'm at the business school over at Sacred Heart and it's on fire, it would get sent to the Bridgeport State Police Dispatch Facility downtown Bridgeport. They would then have to sit there and say, oh, hold on, we need critical dispatch, let me get them, hold on, we'll send it over there. We then get somebody else on the phone and they say, oh, okay, you need a fire truck, sure, we'll send it there. So there's already two people you have to look at just get a fire truck. Why can't we sit there and say, take your cog, okay, we've got these things called cogs, they're small in our counties. The cogs are here is Bridgeport, Fairfield, Monroe, 6 cogs. Combine them all together, there's going to be one centralized emergency dispatch facility. Whether that be a Bridgeport or Fairfield, it's the state police barracks downtown, I don't particularly care. As long as somebody answers the phone and says, the business school Sacred Heart's on fire, sure, let me call the Fairfield Fire Department and have them send a truck. We could all regionalize that tomorrow. We could cut down on the overhead expenses. We could cut down on the redundancy. We could cut the middleman at the state police out of the process. And that's just the low-hanging fruit.
I don't think that resolves the problem. Can I tell you why? I'll just give you a simple math. When I go to town hall and I see the clerks working behind the counter, they're making $30,000 a year. I'd like to know where the $88 million went.
But I'm saying, I think that stuff all adds up. It's that redundancy in the system that we're all paying our local property taxes and then the state
We don't see where it's going then. That's the problem. I don't feel like we need state money. I don't feel every town needs state money. I feel that if you break it down to a town and you analyze the town itself, how many students are in the school, how many teachers we need per student, you break it down by unit, by school 1, school 2, school 3, firehouse 1, firehouse 2, firehouse 3. You have people that are in the town wanting to donate their time to look at the budgets. I know a lot of people that did that in the past. Mr. White, who used to work for GT Corporation, he went to Monroe and he analyzed the town budget.
Well, I can't
I'm not talking about town, I'm just talking about in total. All these cities need to break down costs so that the general public can understand the finances that go behind it. Because the books that you have don't really explain anything. It's like all hidden money. It's not broken down.
The question is there a standard reporting format that exists? It's transparent.
Every town in Connecticut has to go through an annual audit. It has to have a CAF, or a comprehensive annual financial report. Every town should have that available. You might not, based on town by town, I don't know if there's a month by month thing. Certain towns have certain stuff. Bridgeport just adopted the system that the state has called open government. We can go online, we can track it by
I'll give you an example. Well, every police department has a standard report for crime nationwide. Is there such an animal in Connecticut for municipal reporting?
Like I said, the only one I'm aware of is the annual council report that every town goes through. I'm not sure the others.
The gap.
They have to be gap
I
compliant.
think my other major concern is, how is Connecticut going to get companies back in? Because when I first worked for GTE Corporation, which is a Fortune 50 company, and I worked for Chuck Lee, Mike Kelly, the bigwigs of the corporation, and I worked for GT Realty Division at the time, they told me the reason they were leaving Connecticut was because the taxes were too high to stay in the state. And it was sad to see that company go, and it went and took over thousands of jobs out of Connecticut. And that building became vacant for a year, and then all of a sudden you have Purdue Pharma coming in and renting out the other 4 floors. Same thing, now you have UBS and RBS that built these giant big buildings, and they're completely vacant in Stanford. There's no one in it. It is the most saddest story ever. And when she talked about trees, that's what Connecticut reminds me. It's a dead state. Trees are dying, companies are dying, people don't feel happy here. And that's the bottom line, and someone needs to fix it. And it's really, really sad. There's so much politics going on between Republican, Democrat. I mean, I don't care. Just put a group of panel together, 5 people to discuss one budget and decide on it. That's it. I mean, how are you going to bring Connecticut jobs back? That is my main point. Because as of right now, I've been unemployed for a year and 3 months, and I'm not lying when I say this. I send 50 applications a day, and there's nothing coming back. I have a friend of mine that I met here who's a student, and he has the same issue. He's a single father. He was working as a temp, $33 an hour. He was working for Charter Communications. He couldn't land a job. They wanted to send him to Colorado. And he said, no, I can't. I have a daughter. He's now looking for work and can't find it.
Thank you. I think you've raised a lot of really key, important decisions, and I think it's food for thought for future forums. I think we could devote an entire forum on how to make Connecticut a more business-friendly state. I think that merits an entire forum unto itself, and we have interesting poll results.
I don't know how you're going to bring Connecticut jobs back. Are you going to decrease tax for businesses to come in?
You know, I think one of the challenges that we have with our state is that there is no vision and there is no plan, right? So and it all comes back to the fiscal policy. It all comes back to that. So remember, we were going to be a biotech center. We enticed Jackson Labs to come in. We're going to do all of these great things. And part of that is that there are tax credits that these companies get, research tax credits. The pharmaceutical industry is one that it's a big gamble. So to be able to have those things in place is really important. So the state did the right thing. And then they're like, oh no, we gotta take that back now. Oh, we can't do that anymore. Oh, well, I know we said that, but dang it, it's not gonna work out. So it's very, as Senator Wong said, the unpredictability, the lack of transparency, and a solid plan for what we want our state to be. We talk about transportation. There's no prioritization of projects. For heaven's sakes, why in the world did we spend $800 million on a busway to nowhere when we could have been investing in the economic engine of our state? So then we can talk about tolls and we need more money. No, not unless there are safeguards in place, because our state fundamentally has a spending problem. It's not that we don't have enough money. There's plenty of money. As you said, where's the $80 million, right?
$80 million from
Right. It's how are we spending it and prioritizing where that goes. And I think really having a solid plan for where we want to get to and then following it and being consistent, not backtracking.
Thank you, thank you. And this gentleman has been waiting very patiently to ask his question, and then we're going to have to conclude after your question.
Yeah, I think it's timely following her. I want to know the panel's opinion on the MGM project that's proposed in Bridgeport. It's 7,000 jobs, and it's no government funding, private industry. I know sometimes you guys can get your hands around the private companies actually move in here. So I would like to know all your opinions on that. There's 7,000 jobs.
I think it's a conversation that certainly needs to be had, and needs to be something we prioritize conversation on the legislature. You're right, it's 7,000 jobs in an area of the state that needs it's $30 million in revenue to the city of Bridgeport, which would lower the mill rate of Bridgeport from 54 to 49, also overnight. And that makes a significant dent in the property taxes folks are paying in one of our state's largest cities, in our state's largest city, that needs to be an economic engine for the state in order to recover. So unless somebody else is going to come forward with 7,000 jobs and $30 million.
No one is coming forward. They're the only ones.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll be the one who's the brave one, I'm opposed to the project. And I've supported the casino up in upstate and working with our tribes to keep the 6,000 jobs that we have in the state of Connecticut that are in that industry. I don't think that the MGM proposal is realistic. I don't think that it's good for the region. And I think that it's one that is really not for real. I mean, from a standpoint of, we have a compact with 2 tribes right now. You break that compact, there's a lot of money at stake. And, you know, I support Bridgeport. I live in Norwalk, and I think, you know, our state is about as big as Los Angeles County. In fact, it may even be larger. So we can't be so parochial that I don't think about Bridgeport because I live in Norwalk and I represent Norwalk and Darien. So I think we have to look at what's best for the state all the way around. I just don't think that this project is the best project for the region. Clearly, you disagree with that. I think the rest of the, I don't want to say the rest of the panel feels, but
But you really haven't said why you don't agree with it.
I thought I just articulated that.
No, you said you don't agree with it because you're supporting the Indian tribes.
I don't think
That's decreasing their revenue every single year.
May I weigh in on this? Because the Wall Street Journal last week had a very good article about New York State and how all of the gambling places, the revenues were much less than they expected. The pie has been broken into too many pieces, and the panacea with the gambling was not there.
That's true.
I'll follow up on that, and I'm glad to hear that Senator Doug is opposed to the gambling project of MGM. But I am fundamentally opposed to any expansion of gambling in our great state. I think the first point is to address we are chasing after a mature market with declining revenues and prospect. And everywhere you see that there are declining estimates, from even the slots with the 2 tribes, the decline is evident. And just as with any struggling entity, they just want to build and build and build. So I think the first thing is we're chasing after an industry that's mature and declining. Number 2, I do believe that we have a constitutional problem. Through our compact, we have, in essence, as a legislature, given monopolistic control of gambling in our state to the 2 tribes. The fact that we cannot do Keno, lottery, or any form of gambling in the state without the approval of the 2 tribes is something that is patently unconstitutional, in my opinion. The fact that we're giving carte blanche to any entity, to those 2 tribes in gambling is troubling as a legislative constitutional aspect. But thirdly, and most importantly, gambling is not the sizzle and the golden promise of the pot at the end of the rainbow. The fact that we have seen over and over again the societal cost of gambling, how it impacts the most vulnerable and the most at risk in our communities. The fact that the promise of Atlantic City has a panacea for all the problems of economics. Look at Atlantic City now. Look at the lives that are broken. The fact that gambling addiction is the highest cause of suicides. If you look at the history of Pathway in eastern Connecticut as a result of gambling, we've not addressed it. All we look for is, for any gambling, the promise of the payoff.
Well,
Have we really
this is a
seen
resort project. This is a project that's a resort with.
predicated on what? Predicated on gambling. And we have to be very conscious of the societal cost The fact that lives are devastated by gambling addiction. We've not addressed it, but the other factor is this. Look at all the gambling models and how it sucks any aspect of energy from our main streets. Gambling's model is, I'm gonna bring you in, and I'm gonna keep you there. And the fact that we're trying to support our businesses.
Tony, you bring up Atlantic City because that's just an isolated boardwalk. The other projects that casinos have in New Orleans, Detroit, they don't suck the downtown out. They don't leave a vacuum around their buildings. They're part of the city. Go look at those places.
I'd be happy to, but you cannot deny that when 17 religious groups and community advocate groups from the Catholic bishops, from the Episcopals and the Congregationalists and the Muslims in the community, the Interfaith Council in the community have said unequivocally that they are opposed to any gambling. Who's listening to them? We've not addressed it. We have not addressed it. And the fact, plain and simple, is this. We have a promise, but isn't that what gambling's all about? Let me tell you, the house never loses. It's the people who lose.
People will get jobs.
Well, thank you. We are going to have to conclude here. I thank you all for coming tonight. Clearly, there's a lot of energy, and there's a great desire I can see to talk about these difficult challenges facing Connecticut. So this will be the first of a series of forums that we will have throughout the year. And I encourage you to stay posted for future events that we are going to have. Thank you for coming out tonight. And thank you for our panelists for making time from your busy schedules. We do hope you will come back again and see us in the future. Thank you.